the topic is Africa and the Sudan. And of course, Dr. Madu, before we had our final commercial break, we were talking about the Sudan and some of the problems created by the various religious groups in the Sudan. But now let's look at it from the perspective of perhaps laying out a possible solution. Now, what do you see as a solution, and what should the United States do in terms of its role, in its new role in Africa now?
Well, I think the first thing is for the Islamic government in Khartoum to repudiate, the law, the Sharia law that it wants to extend all over the Sudan. They have to realize that this is a country, a multi-faith country, in which, there are different religions and different, persuasions. So that's the number one. Without that, there'll be no peace in the Sudan, because the Southerners refuse to accept an imposition on their faith. That's number one. Number two is for the government to create a broad-based, government that's not dominated by the Arab North. Three is to make sure that the money that comes from the oil now being, drilled in the South is equitably distributed. Because what happens is that the northern government is likely to take the resources from the South to the North to build the North and neglect where that money comes from. Well, that's a very big problem now.
Do not the people in the South have access to the oil? I mean, the oil is in actuality coming from the Christian area in the South.
That's right.
But now the oil is being drained out of the South by the Arab North and used, the resources they're used. There's no way that the Christians who are sitting, from what you're saying, who are really sitting on the oil, there's no way that they can control that oil?
No, because I think, and also it also obtains to a lot of the countries in Africa. Most of the time, for reasons no one can tell, the revenues of the country are not divided according to where it comes from. It's according to the population. And that is wrong. In this country, the richest states in this country are those who have more resources, more tax bases. I mean, you cannot tell Alaskans to send all their money down to Tennessee so you can live well. Alaska has the highest per capita income in the country, because of the small population
and the resource.
Okay, but in the Sudan, it also applies in Nigeria. They share the resources according to population. So those who produce more are really the poorest, you see. So that's what's happening in the Sudan, and a lot of Sudanese, even those here, have spoken about it. They take the money that comes from the oil, use it for development purposes in the north, instead of the south where it's coming from. You've heard about the Ogoni problem in Nigeria. It's similar to that. The oil comes from Ogoni, but the oil and money is transferred to the north, leaving those who really have that resource to be the poorest instead of being the richest. So it's the same thing. So the government has to listen to that, because that will be another problem. Even if the government relaxes on the question of Islamic fundamentalism, still the allocation of resources will be another source of problem with the southern, Sudanese, unless these issues are all addressed at one time at a conference, at which I hope the United States can serve as a mediator. But that's unlikely now, because the U.S. has problems with the Sudanese government because of its Islamic, its determination to spread Islam across its borders.
And so this has created a problem with the United States government.
Absolutely. And that's why the U.S. government really indirectly is supporting the Sudanese People's Liberation Army through Ethiopia and Eritrea, even though Eritrea and Ethiopia are fighting amongst themselves now over a disputed border.
Now, while we talk about this as an issue, as a diplomatic issue, now this is also an issue of tremendous suffering. Now, these people have been at war, one way or the other, since the 1950s, and they're still at war. And I would imagine that this has created all kinds of deaths and deprivation. Let's speak to it from that perspective in the last minute or so that we have here.
Well, there's a lot of hunger, a lot of starvation, in southern Sudan. In fact, a lot of American congressmen have been visiting the Sudan recently. I'm sure 2-3 months ago, Senator Frist was there fact, he performed some surgery in one makeshift hospital in Southern Sudan. And when he came out, he said he has never seen anything like it before. There's so much the international community can do, you know, for a people without them helping themselves. Oxfam, Caritas, some other American relief organizations have been in the Sudan since the 1950s helping, you know, but the situation there is just overwhelming. That I don't see any end to that suffering until the government in Sudan recognizes that it has to negotiate with a large segment of its population on how it's going to live. You see, no amount of force is going to be able to solve the Southern Sudanese problem. It has not solved it since 1953. It's not going to solve it in 1998 because the people know exactly what they want. They do not want to be Muslims, period. They want to stay as Christians, and they do not want their resources going to the north. So as soon as they recognize this, then the suffering will end, and there will be no need for, you know, outside people coming in to feed the people. The people will farm and feed themselves.
Dr. Madu, we're out of time here, and let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information about Africa and the Sudan. And let me encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.